Oh man, I've been waiting so long for this. As soon as I saw the preview, I was pumped. And then I read the book, and then I was pumped more. And I saw the previews, I was pumped more. I was ready, I was so ready. And it mostly didn't disappoint me. Alright, Steven Spielberg took this book. I read it. I did the thing. And turned it into a movie. Basic story. You've seen the previews, you know, but in the not too distant future, somewhere in time and space, humans pretty much used up 90% of the resources on the earth, and so everything's kind of falling apart. Life sucks. But there was a video game invented called the Oasis, which is now where people spend most of their time. Virtual reality game. People throw on their headsets, boom, escape reality. Oh, the dream. And the creator of this game, which expanded to pretty much be almost reality. That's where people have jobs there, people make money there, people buy and sell stuff there. He dies and he creates this contest, and the winner of the contest gets control over the Oasis and pretty much the economy. And all they have to do is follow some clues, find 3 keys. It's theirs. We follow Percival, H, Artemis, and really the whole thing about this is obviously in the book, it's just filled with constant references to mostly 80s stuff, some other things, but just really deep dives and a lot of stuff that I didn't really get the first time I read the book. Had to look it up. The movie does the same thing, kind of, but instead of focusing on the 80s, it kind of expands to really all decades from like the 80s to the 2010s. And it's not really necessarily nostalgia-based, it's just reference-based. Like, that's from that, oh, and that's, I remember. And it's really not as much like deep dives. They very much wanted it to be something that more people could get into, I think. And so they went with just kind of tons of references, but recognizable stuff to more people. You know, Borderlands, Halo, Overwatch, Terminator, stuff like that. That's, you know, very popular stuff even today, no matter the age of the actual source material. But I mean, I still thought it was fun to see all those things together in one environment. And I think one of the most important things is that really Spielberg did a fantastic job in translating the Oasis into just a visually stunning place. They do a great job of putting all these properties in the same universe and having it aesthetically look like they belong. And just some of the music when you first go into the Oasis just transported me into this world. Felt like it could be a real game that I could go into and experience.
There's nowhere left to go. Nowhere. Except the Oasis.
The characters, very different than what they were in the book. So if you're really attached to those characters, I think you might be disappointed on that front. And if you really kind of related to them on a deep level, they're different. So you might not kind of connect to it quite as much. But I still thought just separating the two, the characters worked in the purposes of the film. Ty Sheridan as Percival, Olivia Cooke as Artemis. None of the characters are particularly deep, but those two as kind of the main characters I thought brought life into what could have been an extremely two-dimensional character and made it relatable enough that I was able to kind of buy into them as real people and not just images on a screen that I'm looking at. But there were definitely some characters, especially Dido and Shido, that pretty much didn't even have to be there. It felt like they were there because they were in the book, and I'm glad they were there, but I just wish they'd done more with them. But there's no weight behind anything they did because they're barely in the movie, and even when they're there, they don't talk, they don't do anything, they're just there. And that really kind of bothered me. There's a handful of characters, pretty much all the side characters just have no development and not a whole lot of personality behind them. And that really could have got me a little more invested in the film and really believe that it's a fully fledged out world. The villains are the IOI corporation that they want to take over the Oasis and control everything. They're not really a huge threat. It's very much kind of shows how this film is trying to appeal to, again, this wider audience where they're just complete doofuses and they most of the time feel completely inept at their jobs, which is fine, but you just kind of get the feeling that there is not a huge threat. But again, the plot is super cliche in this hero's journey type deal where you know they're not going to win anyway, so you might as well make them at least entertaining to watch, which they do. But the thing that really bothered me the most, two things actually. A lot of the dialogue didn't feel natural. I get why they were saying what they were saying in these points, because there was a lot that they needed to explain to the audience and what was happening and what some of these items did, but it just felt very forced because these are people that are gunters and that their whole livelihood is based off of finding out the answers to these clues, finding the keys, and finding the egg, but it felt like they didn't really actually know a whole lot about what was going on. I mean, they're just picking up items in stores and they're like, oh, this does this. I'm like, shouldn't you already know that because you spend 8 hours a day, 7 days a week in this game at minimum? And they're explaining the answers to these clues to each other. Like, again, once you find out the answer to the clue, shouldn't you be able to put the pieces together yourself because you know this in detail so much? And the first clue itself was just completely obvious. Like, how did it take 5 years for people to figure that out? The other thing is, the biggest change, not necessarily the biggest change from the books. There were a lot of changes that make sense because of rights and because of just how much more you can put in a book than in a movie. But Artemis's character in the book was awkward. She was big. She had, you know, a birthmark on her face, and they keep the birthmark, but she's still like very smooth and she's got a lot of swag and stuff. And I really liked how she was in the book, and that's not really a type of woman that you see as a romantic interest in films very much. I thought that would have been awesome to see that and kind of more related to the nerd culture that the book appeals to. So I think that's one of the big differences, that the book is very much nerd core culture, and while the movie is still centered around that, because I think if you're not going to enjoy some of these film and video game references, there's not a ton to the movie. It still is a much broader audience than the one the book was appealing to.
Who is this Parzival, and how the hell is he winning?
Find him. This isn't just a game. I'm talking about actual life and death stuff.
The Oasis,
the world's most important economic resource.
it's nothing less than a war for control of the future.
But man, I really just enjoyed this. I felt like every time I was bogged down in the dialogue or the two-dimensional characters or the basic plot, I was like, oh my god, that thing's fighting that thing, and look, there that is. And just the visually intense action scenes was like, blah, 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 blah. And I just had a blast. It's really one of those films. It's not breaking down barriers. It could have done more, certainly. But in the sci-fi hero arc genre, it does a great job. I certainly enjoyed it because of the references. That's something I was looking forward to, and I enjoyed it as much as I thought I would. And the characters are good enough. The plot is good enough that it just becomes a really fun movie. Not intellectually challenging, especially some of the themes that bring up. They could have explored more. If you are into the kind of culture this film is going for, it's definitely fun to at least watch once, just for the visual effects and seeing all these things in the universe and in an appealing way, if not like the greatest way. Now, if you'll excuse me, got some virtual butt to kick.